I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown. Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. COVID gets the blame, often at the White House, but will Democrats pay a high price for inflation?
Looking at the inflation picture now, it only seems to be getting worse as they're considering another bill. So I do think that this reverberates to the president, and no matter what they're saying about COVID, it's real.
We speak with Fox's Bret Baier.
I'm Dave Anthony. It sets the deadly Michigan high school shooting apart from others in the past. The accused student gunman and his parents are all in the same jail.
The prosecutors have exercised their discretion to charge him as an adult, and they certainly have the discretion under Michigan law to do that. But then that begs the question, why charge the parents?
And I'm Dr. Nicole Sapphire. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
COVID has now claimed 800,000 lives in the U.S., and 1 year after vaccinations began, cases are rising again at a time when the president's poll numbers keep sinking.
People's psychology on the economy, on how they're experiencing things in the country right now is related to COVID.
White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki reacting Friday to a Monmouth University poll that found 2/3 of Americans believe the U.S. is on the wrong track. And an ABC Ipsos poll finds just 28% approve of how President Biden is handling inflation, as recent surveys also show rising prices and everyday bills surpassing the pandemic as the top concern. The president's numbers also dropping on other issues, including crime and COVID.
We haven't seen a slide like this in a long time.
Bret Baier is chief political correspondent for Fox News and the host of Special Report on Fox News Channel.
It is contingent on a number of different things, but I really think it started around the Afghanistan withdrawal. That particular movement and effort by the administration and then the fallout from it started this competency question, and it started raising its head in different polls. That's where the slide started, but then as it continues, I think it has more to do with inflation and what people are paying, not only at the pump, but at the grocery store and every place else.
What about the president's handling of the economy? Because inflation is one of many things that the White House seems to kind of blame on COVID or frustration with COVID on some level. But if people are hurting with the higher prices, who's the public blaming?
Well, it ultimately falls to whoever's in charge. And this president will be the recipient of that if it continues. And I think it depends. The administration is suggesting that 17 Nobel laureates say that, their Build Back Better plan and the trillions of dollars they're putting into the economy will not harm the inflation situation. But you heard Democratic Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia say the 17 Nobel laureates were wrong. And looking at the inflation picture now, it only seems to be getting worse as they're considering another bill. So I do think that this reverberates to the president, and no matter what they're saying about COVID, it's real.
Yeah, and even though the Senate Majority Leader is still talking about a vote before Christmas, Senator Manchin doesn't seem ready to take the plunge. And then we have this alternative score from the Congressional Budget Office showing much more debt if the proposed programs last longer than what's proposed. Is that resonating with the public, or is it too much in the weeds?
I think for most Americans, they're not down to that granular level. They know that it's a lot of money. We used to think that $800 billion for the TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, was a huge number. And now we are into the billions and billions and trillions. And, we just went through $1.9 trillion for a COVID relief package back in March. The infrastructure bill, bipartisan effort, passed. Almost $2 trillion, and now you're looking at a bill that, depending who you ask, could be $3 to $6 trillion with a T. So people, I think, look at it as a lot of money. The political side of it is that the administration tied the infrastructure bill to this other Build Back Better bill, and if that one doesn't get through, it's going to be seen as a loss, even though the first one got through.
I remember hearing along the way during this long debate that there were other moderate Democrats not satisfied with some of the provisions in Build Back Better. Is it really just Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema at this point, or are there, in fact, others? Can they count on the rest of the Democrats in the Senate right now?
I think that's a great question. Manchin has told me that there are other Democrats who are kind of under his umbrella of concern, that outside of Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona. You know, I don't know, but Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, who's up for re-election, you know, if the bill is not looking like it's coming together, he would be probably happier not to have to vote on it politically. Now, you know, what people are going to say publicly and what they say privately sometimes in politics are two different things.
Mm-hmm. The president seems to be under mounting pressure as well on rising crime. Can he actually do anything to curb crime in cities, though?
Well, his messaging has been interesting to watch, or at least the White House's messaging. Jen Psaki, at first, kind of blowing off the crime issue a few weeks ago, and then coming back and saying, you know, we've studied this and crime is, in fact, on the rise in a number of big cities and places across the country, but also pointing to COVID as a reason for that, not acknowledging that in some of these places, prosecutors failing to go after criminals or releasing them immediately is the recidivism that we're seeing in a lot of places. They're not ready for that messaging, and you're right. I mean, a lot of it is handled locally.
I think the majority whip in the Senate, Dick Durbin, was asked about having a hearing, and his response was partly that, well, he'd like to go a step further and maybe actually have a markup on some proposals. But everything that he mentioned was along the lines of gun control.
Which is interesting from a senator who represents Illinois and, in part, Chicago, with some of the strictest gun laws in the country. Listen, it's you can go down the gun road, and you are not going to go far in this Congress the way it's split as far as legislation that's going to get through. There are a number of other things that can happen about funding police officers or assisting from a federal level on that effort, and that has not happened as of yet.
COVID had been a high note for President Biden for a long time, but he's getting low marks for that now in the polls as well. And again, the White House blames frustration with COVID for a lot of other low numbers. I mean, is that a valid argument?
COVID is, you know, it's tough to say how it plays politically. I do think that there's a backlash to a lot of the strict restrictions that we're seeing, considering that we have vaccines, we have boosters, we have now a pill from Pfizer and others who say that it's very effective and is going to be coming out soon, they say. So there is some thought that, you know, any sort of lockdown or mandates, there'll be pushback to. And it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats as well. And you're starting to see that. And because of that, how the administration talks about it really matters. And they're seeing some backlash.
While all of these issues circulate, the House committee probing the Capitol riot continues its work, issuing subpoenas and launching contempt cases against former Trump administration officials for not complying. Most recently, former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who stopped cooperating last week. He told Fox's Sean Hannity the committee is really just out to get the former president.
This is not about me holding me in contempt. It's not even about making the Capitol safer. We see that by some of the selective leaks that are going on right now. This is about Donald Trump and about actually going after him once again.
Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney, one of two Republicans on the committee, insists it's an objective search for the truth.
We as Republicans used to be unified on this point in terms of what happened on January 6th and the responsibility the president had to stop it.
But what about voters who aren't far left or far right? Have they already moved on?
I think there's a lot of people who want to move on. I do think that, there is this sense that the January 6th committee is going to get to the bottom of what was happening at the White House and in communication with different Congress members. And in essence, they're going to have this moment where this report comes out. And obviously, it's not going to look good politically, one would guess, for some members of Congress and perhaps for the former president. But this, it would have been a lot easier had Republicans, not just Liz Cheney and Kinzinger, if there had been a McCarthy buy-in, the minority leader buy-in to this committee, I think there would have been a little bit less of this partisan back and forth over it. They're going to do their job. They're going to come to the end. There's going to be a report, and there's going to be political recrimination. And then on the other side, there's going to be charges that it was all ginned up. So I think that's going to follow the blueprint. But along the way, we're probably going to find out some information that we didn't know before.
And you have the midterms really looming in the not too distant future. I mean, now we're less than a year away. Are Republicans in danger at this point of counting their chickens before they're hatched, based on the president's poll numbers?
I think they feel pretty confident. I think they, in the House, feel like they can paint by numbers and pick up the seats they need. There's already seats that the census is essentially giving them extra seats in red places. I think that there's a feeling that they can get over that number and likely have many more. The Senate is a bigger question, and a lot more can happen in the 10 months that we'll see ahead.
What do you think, or maybe none of them, but what, if any of these issues, COVID, inflation, the January 6th committee, crime, if any of those issues changes substantially, do you think that would change the outlook for the midterms?
Well, if inflation changes and the economic picture changes for people sitting at home, yes, the motivations for voting change for independents and maybe frustrated Democrats. But other issues, how this administration is handling foreign affairs, the lingering efforts about and concerns about Afghanistan, the southern border, immigration, especially for those border states, will be a big issue. And then crime is the issue that gets across all different ideologies and all different demographics. Because if you don't feel safe in and about your city or your state, that is a motivator, a big one, for going to the polls.
We certainly appreciate you being on top of all of it. Bret Baier, Fox News chief political correspondent and the host of Special Report with Bret Baier on the Fox News channel. Thank you very much for coming on the Rundown.
You bet.
This is Dr. Nicole Saphier with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
They came to court in shackles from the same Michigan jail where their 15-year-old son is also being held. James and Jennifer Crumbley had a probable cause hearing on different charges than Ethan, who's up for murder, attempted murder, and terrorism in the Oxford High School shooting 2 weeks ago, accused of killing 4 of his fellow students and wounding 6 others and a teacher.
It is causing great distress among our whole agency that this happened and that there was an opportunity potentially to prevent it.
Oakland County Sheriff Mike Bouchard, the Crumbley parents were in school earlier the day of the shooting to discuss Ethan's behavior and violent messages and drawings.
Gun owners have a responsibility.
Prosecutor Karen McDonald charged the parents with involuntary manslaughter.
That a parent could read those words and also know that their son had access to a deadly weapon that they gave him is unconscionable.
But Andy McCarthy says this case is virtually unheard of.
I have to say virtually because there are 1 or 2 cases over the years, but it's almost never the case that the parents are charged.
McCarthy's a former federal prosecutor, now a Fox News contributor.
There are 2 related decisions, it seems to me that they're related, that have been made here. One is that they have decided to treat the 15-year-old who actually did the shooting. We have to say allegedly at this point, but this is not one of those cases where there's a lot of doubt about what happened. The prosecutors have exercised their discretion to charge him as an adult, and they certainly have the discretion under Michigan law to do that. But then that begs the question, why charge the parents? If you're going to charge the kid as an adult, then you're claiming that he had the agency and the responsibility in committing this crime and should be treated and prosecuted as if he were an adult independent actor.
So, Andy, is that something, if you are the defense attorneys for the parents, is that your number one defense? They're charged with involuntary manslaughter. Is that the number one case you have?
I think, Dave, that the best case that the lawyers for the parents have is that under Michigan law and what the jury would be instructed with respect to involuntary manslaughter, the government can't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, because it's not enough that they acted irresponsibly and even negligently. Under Michigan law, the result here, the shooting, has to be the natural and necessary outcome from the act of negligence.
Where's the line here? Because they allege that this gun was purchased not long before the shooting, and the prosecutor alleges that it is a gun owner's responsibility to not allow the gun to get into the hands of a minor that way, especially because they say the parents knew that he had these violent thoughts or whatever, use cartoons or images or threats or whatever you want to say about them, that they say that maybe there is you could take that step potentially.
The problems that they're going to have with that argument are twofold. One is the legislature in Michigan has had proposed a number of times what are known as CAP laws, this child access prevention laws with respect to firearms that have been enacted in some states. Michigan has elected not to enact it. So to the extent the prosecutors are saying it was unlawful for the parents not to make sure that the kid could not get access to the gun, they've proposed making that a crime in Michigan, but they haven't. So it's up to the legislature to make things criminal. The prosecutor can't do that. The prosecutor can only enforce the laws that the legislature has enacted. And the other thing that the prosecutors say is that the only way that you can safely put a gun away if you're the adult is to lock the gun in a container with a clip on it that makes it a safety clip that makes it not fireable and keep the ammunition away from it. That may be the opinion of the prosecutor, but there's nothing in Michigan law that says that is the case.
Now, for the average person, the parents did not turn themselves in. There was a manhunt. They were found hiding in a Detroit warehouse. That doesn't look to the average person like someone who's innocent, right?
It doesn't, and it would be the kind of evidence that would be very damning in a lot of cases. It's called, the prosecutors refer to it, and the law refers to it as consciousness of guilt evidence. In other words, if you're innocent, you don't usually flee. That's the sort of thing a normal person wouldn't do. So it's often very powerful evidence for a jury. I don't know that it will have the same power in this instance. The parents' defense is really a legal one, not a factual one. I don't think they're going to be saying, I'm not guilty because I didn't do this. What they're going to say is that these things that I did as a matter of law do not amount to involuntary manslaughter in Michigan. And if that's their defense, then the consciousness of guilt evidence, if they go forward, if they're allowed by the court to go forward with it, won't be very persuasive.
All right, let's take this a step further, Andy. Can the school district be held responsible? Now, there have been lawsuits filed, And in one case, the parents of a 17-year-old student who was shot in the neck and wounded. Now, they believe teachers and they believe counselors and administrators should be held responsible. Their attorney, Jeffrey Feiger, claims that they could have easily prevented what happened. And I want you to hear what he has to say about that.
He was drawing photographs of mayhem. They were aware of posts on the internet indicating that he was intending to commit mayhem. He drew pictures indicating that he was going to engage in a murderous rage.
Again, that's Feiger talking about the accused gunman, the 15-year-old. What do you think?
I think they should all be subject to civil liability. But other than the fact that the parents were aware that the gun had been purchased, whereas the school officials weren't, and I'm not suggesting that that's not a significant distinction. It obviously is. But the theory of prosecuting the parents is the same one that you would have if you were to decide to indict the school officials, which is that their negligence was profound and it led foreseeably to the ultimate conclusion of the mass shooting attack. So I don't like the idea of the criminal law being extended that way. The criminal law is prosecuting the shooter as it should. Yeah. And he's being prosecuted. He's going to have multiple life sentences here. He's a 15-year-old who's being treated as an adult who probably will never, ever be out of confinement.
Let's get into that case against the 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley. He had his probable cause hearing moved to early January. He is facing 4 counts of murder, and of course he's accused of wounding 7 others. You had already said that it seems pretty clear-cut. Does he, do you think, go on some sort of a mental state defense?
I really don't see what else there could conceivably be, Dave. Now, I wouldn't want to say for sure that you go down that road unless all the preliminaries are done. So he'll have to be examined, and he'll get examined by his own psychiatrist in the states, and they'll make an assessment. But as far as like the normal criminal law evidence, which require proof beyond a reasonable doubt of the criminal act, which is the murder, and the criminal state of mind, which they seem to have immense evidence of premeditation here, given the media, the social media postings and the like, it looks like the case, there's a difference between how horrific it is versus how difficult it is to prove. It looks like it's a layup to prove it.
Anybody who's 15 years old, and if he did draw those cartoons and he was going through all those violent images in his head and then he finally, acts it out, he's not right? That's not a right mind.
Well, yes, but think about it. Any case involving a horrific crime. I tried terrorists in the 1990s, and one of the defendants wanted to suggest that the crime, the idea of mass murdering people in the kind of attack that was being plotted, was so beyond the pale of the horror of human imagination that only someone not in his right mind could conceivably come up with it and be responsible for it. If you buy the logic of that argument, then the more horrific a crime is, the less we can hold people accountable for it. So what the criminal law in terms of criminal intent requires is proof that the person understood the rightness or wrongness of his actions and acted intentionally, which means acted not by mistake. And if you can prove that, you have proven criminal intent. It's a very high bar to prove that you lacked mental capacity to commit an offense. You really have to show that the kid didn't know the difference between right and wrong. But I just think it's a very difficult proof.
You referenced the terror case that you'd worked on in the past. There are charges of terrorism in this school shooting. A different level of proof there?
Yeah, and I think it's a real mistake to bring those charges. I don't understand. I mean, I understand as a political gesture why the government and the prosecutor's office would want to do that. as a tactical
the kids
legal...
were traumatized and terrorized, right, by someone shooting up their classrooms, and they were hiding in fear.
I don't think that this qualifies as terrorism under the Michigan statute. But my big problem with it is not the idea of bringing it because you're distinguishing a group at school versus the public at large, which is what terrorism is normally directed at. My problem with what the prosecutors are doing here is, why do it? That you already have with the very serious murder and attempted murder charges, you already have much more criminal exposure than you could ever need to keep this kid neutralized and institutionalized for the rest of his life. And to the extent that you want to raise terrorism, that's something that can always be raised at sentencing. There's no reason to complicate the what should be a very straightforward criminal trial with that kind of stuff, which only is going to make exactly the issue that you raised a couple of minutes ago more pertinent, which is his state of mind.
Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, Fox News contributor. Always good to get your insight on a case. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Dr. Nicole Saphier.
What's on your mind?
The concept of zero COVID, once perhaps a realistic ambition, is now a delusion as variants continue traveling the world, circulating among humans and animals. Thankfully, the initial waves of the pandemic, the devastating stages of intense transmission with a high rate of consequent severe illness, are over for most of the country. This doesn't mean the virus is gone or that transmission is low. Rather, the pandemic is moving into the next phase, becoming endemic. It is almost certain the COVID-19 pandemic will evolve similar to the 1918 influenza virus. A century ago, a novel strain of influenza killed more than 50 million people worldwide. The virus did not disappear. The virus continued to mutate, with seasonal outbreaks from milder variants, further dampened by vaccines and treatments. Sound familiar? It is too early to be certain, but the newest variant of concern, Omicron, may be the path to making this virus endemic, if health officials would only let it. Early data on Omicron show that cases are rising among the vaccinated and unvaccinated, but milder symptoms are being reported in both groups. Nearly 2 years since the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Wuhan, the combination of lessened virulence, natural immunity, vaccinations, and updated treatment protocols have reduced the harm of this virus. To end the hysteria, public health officials must communicate effectively, accurate, metric-driven data with advice, not mandates, on risk reduction strategies rather than media-hyped conjecture. This past week, headlines emphasized the Pfizer CEO suggesting a fourth dose of vaccine may be necessary. This may be true for high-risk individuals, with an annual COVID booster eventually being recommended, similar to the flu shot. However, the current conversation surrounding boosters is myopic and premature. Also, Americans shouldn't be getting public health updates from Big Pharma. Boosting the younger, healthier populations now may be delaying the virus from becoming endemic. Allowing the virus to run its course has never been a public health strategy, as it is risky and will lead to preventable death. However, the COVID vaccines are still protecting against severe disease and shortening the length of illness. Permitting milder infection to circulate will only increase population immunity. The addition of natural immunity from prior COVID-19 infection in a vaccinated person provides robust, long-term protection, more so than vaccine-induced immunity alone, as suggested in the Siren study looking at over 30,000 healthcare workers in the UK. Data from the CDC show the risk of hospitalization from COVID after vaccination to be about 1 in 26,000. To put that in perspective, the lifetime odds of dying in a car crash on the way to work are 1 in 107. That's according to the National Safety Council. Future action should focus on reducing COVID hospitalizations while permitting mild illness to circulate. This can be done through vaccination and healthy lifestyle choices, while boosting anyone who wants it, but especially high-risk individuals and their close contacts. It is time to get back to living life without generalized mask wearing and vaccine cards. Americans are ready to show their smiles and shake hands again. This is Nicole Sapphire. I'm a Fox News contributor and assistant professor at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and Weill Cornell Medical College.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. From the Fox News Podcasts Network, subscribe and listen to the Proud American Podcast, hosted by Marine Corps vet and Fox News contributor Johnny Joey Jones. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.